Ladies shouldn't play with things this heavy. Sit there. Keep the brush moving. Try not to break anything expensive, because everything in this bay costs more than your car, and I have to sign for all of it. You want to be useful on a Saturday, that is fine. Be useful quietly. Master Sergeant Rudy Colbeck did not wait for an answer. He put a bucket of solvent down beside the stool and walked back toward his office with the walk of a man who had settled something. She did not answer him. She took the brush, the gun-cleaning bay of an A-10 wing on a Saturday morning in July, 91 degrees by 8 o'clock. 2 roll-up doors open on the ramp side, and no air moving through either of them. The 30mm cannon sat broken down on its stand, in the middle of the floor. 19 feet of it with the feed system attached. 7 barrels in a rotor cluster, each one 1.5 meters of steel, each one lined inside with carbon fouling the color and texture of dried tar. 4,200 rounds a minute when it runs. 20,000 rounds of barrel life if it is maintained. Less if it is not. 16 people on shift. A surge weekend. 3 jets down for phase. The schedule already 11 hours behind. She was in loaner coveralls. Gray, washed to nothing. No name tape. A stain on the left knee from somebody else's job. 45 years old. Hair pinned up under a ball cap with no unit on it. Nobody had introduced her. That was not an accident, and it was not a disguise. It was 4 days of a wing not being told. There is a specific hierarchy in a gun bay, and it has almost nothing to do with rank. It has to do with who has done the job longest without hurting anybody. A staff sergeant with 6 years on guns outranks a captain in that room in every way that matters to the people holding the tools, and everybody in the building knows it. And the captain knows it too if she is any good. Colbeck sat at the top of that hierarchy, and had for 6 years. Nobody in the section had ever audited him. Not once. Quality assurance sampled the flight line and the phase dock. The gun shop was a back shop. Back shops get looked at when something breaks. Nothing had broken. Airman First Class Des Okori, 21, was told to keep an eye on her. Chief says show her the brush and the solvent tank, he said. Sorry. He also said not to let you touch the rotor. Okay. 1 word. He waited for more, and there was not any more, so he showed her the brush and the solvent tank. 8,000 kilometers away and 7 years earlier, on a night that had nothing to do with that bay, a radio had said this. Sandy 01, this is on you now. A ground party's voice. Flat. Fast. A young man reading numbers off a map board with something happening behind him. The answer had come back 6 seconds later. Level. Unhurried. The pitch exactly where it had started. Copy. Sandy 01 has it. That is all the audience gets of that night for now. Back in the bay, she started on number 1 barrel. Here is the thing that was wrong with her, and it took the shop 11 minutes to feel it, and 2 days to name it. She cleaned in sequence. Not the sequence the shop used. The sequence the technical order prints. Bore first from breech to muzzle, 1 pass, inspect. Then the gas port. Then the rotor track. Each item touched once. Her lips moving on the step numbers, silent. The way a person does when the list lives in the hands and not on the wall. Nobody in that bay had cleaned in that order in 9 years. There was a faster way that worked, and everybody used it. The faster way is not wrong. That is the part that makes this hard. You brush all 7, then you inspect all 7, and you save about 40 minutes across a gun, and 40 minutes on a surge weekend is a real thing. The order in the book exists because inspection immediately after cleaning catches what cleaning uncovers. Erosion at the muzzle end does not look like anything under carbon. It looks like something 11 seconds after the carbon comes off, and then it looks like nothing again once your eye has moved on to the next barrel. She did it in the order, in the book. At 0850, she set number 1 barrel down, wiped her hands on her thigh, and picked up number 2 without looking up. Kolbeck watched her through his office window for 4 seconds. 41 years old, 19 in, a back that had been going since 2020, and a section that had been 3 technicians short since the spring of 2024. He looked at a middle-aged woman on a stool moving slowly through a job that a good technician does fast. He decided she was slow. That was the mistake. Everything after it came out of that 4 seconds. At the far end of the bay, Staff Sergeant Casper Nolde was pulling panels off a spare gun cradle and not looking at anybody. 29 years old. Dedicated crew chief. Which means one airframe is his, with his name stenciled on it, and he knows that jet the way other people know a brother. He looked up once. He saw the stool, the brush, the woman, the order she was working in. He looked back down at the cradle. 16 people working. 1 woman on a stool with a wire brush and a bucket of solvent. And a crew chief in the doorway who had not said anything yet. At 9:15, she stopped brushing. She held number 4 barrel up against the light from the roll-up door and turned it a quarter turn. Then again. Then she set it down on the felt and did not pick up the brush. "I need a bore gauge." Okori looked at her. "Augmentees do not ask for bore gauges. Augmentees ask where the bathroom is and when lunch is. Ma'am, the gauge is in the tool crib and it needs a sign out." "Then sign it out." 3 words. He went and got it. The gauge came back in a foam case, cold from the crib. She ran it into number 4. Read it. Wrote nothing down. Ran it into number 6. Read it. Then she said the number. Number 4 is .009 over. Number 6 is .012 over. Serviceable limit is .006. Technical Order 1-A-10-33, Table 4-2. Not .009, .009 over. The bay did not go quiet. That happens in stories. What happened here is that 3 people stopped talking at once and did not know why they had. Because there are 2 ways to say a number in a maintenance shop. One of them is a guess with a decimal in it. The other one is a measurement, and a measurement arrives with a limit attached and a paragraph reference behind it, and the person saying it does not look at your face afterward to see how it landed. She did not look at anybody's face. She was already reaching for number 6. Nolde crossed 40 feet of concrete without deciding to. He took the gauge from her. He did not ask permission, and she did not offer it. He ran it himself into number 4, because a crew chief believes his own hands before he believes anybody's mouth. .009 over. He ran number 6, .012. He looked at her. 29 years old, 4 years on the same airframe, and something in his chest had just changed position. A crew chief's whole professional life is an argument with entropy about one specific machine. Everything that goes into his airplane is a thing he has to believe in on somebody else's word. He does not get to check all of it. He gets to check almost none of it. So he builds a mental list of whose word is good. In 4 seconds on a Saturday morning, that list got 1 name longer, and he did not have a name to put on it. He said nothing. She was nobody. He had a cradle to strip. Kolbeck came out of the office. "All right. What is happening at that stand? Because it is not cleaning." "Chief." She gauged the bores. Okoria, too fast, too honest. 4 and 6 are past limits. Kolbeck laughed once, without any cruelty in it, which was somehow worse. The gauge in that crib has been out of calibration since the spring. I have told the flight 3 times. You gauge with that thing, and it will tell you the barrels are made of cheese. Put it back in the case. Put the barrels back on the felt. And let us not turn a Saturday into a paperwork event. He said it in a paragraph. He said it well. 19 years of standing in front of people had made him good at the shape of sentences. She answered in 2 words. "Yes, Chief." She put the gauge back in the case. And here is what nobody in that bay saw, because nobody was looking at her hands. She put the gauge in the case with the serial number facing up, and she read that serial number left to right, thumb tracking under the digits, lips still, the way a pilot reads a form. 7 years earlier, on the second fragment of a radio call, Sandy 01, weather is closing at your 270, ceiling coming down. Copy. Sandy 01, be advised, Sandy 02 has taken damage and is off station. 9 seconds of nothing. In that kind of 9 seconds, a man on the ground counts his own heartbeat and gets to 11. Sandy 01 copies. I am staying. 3 words in the middle that the ground party would repeat for the rest of his life. I am staying. Back in the bay, the barrels went back on the felt. The gauge went back to the crib. The surge schedule stayed 11 hours behind, and now it was 11 hours behind, with 2 barrels on it that were past limits and a signature block waiting. Colbeck went back into the office. Nolda stood at the stand for a moment after everybody else had moved on. He looked at number 4. He looked at the woman on the stool who had gone back to brushing in a sequence he had only ever seen printed. Then he went and looked up the calibration record for the bore gauge in the tool crib. It was current. Calibrated on the 9th of June. Good for a year. A bore gauge back in its case, 2 barrels still on the stand, and a section chief who had just told a lie in front of his shop for the first time in this story. By 10:30, she had a name in that shop, and it was not hers. The volunteer. A technician said it in the break room with a coffee in his hand, and it got a laugh. And once a thing gets a laugh in a maintenance shop, it is load-bearing by lunch. Careful, the volunteer will gauge your sandwich. The volunteer found a discrepancy in the vending machine. It moved the way those things move, not as an attack, as a convenience. A shop under pressure needs a shorthand for what everybody is, so that nobody has to think about anybody twice. She was the volunteer. It cost nothing to say, and it saved everybody the work of forming an opinion. By 11 o'clock, 2 people who had not been in the break room were using it. None of them were cruel men. That is the part that matters. 14 of the 16 people in that bay would have helped her carry something heavy without being asked. They just had a chief who had told them, in 4 seconds at a window, what she was, and a shop takes its temperature from the chief. She came into the break room at 10:40 for water. The room did the thing rooms do. 2 conversations continued at slightly the wrong volume. One stopped. She filled a bottle from the tap, said nothing, and went back out. O'Corey followed her at 11 with a second brush and a pair of nitrile gloves in his hand. Chief said not to help you. Then do not. Yes, ma'am. He put the gloves down on the felt anyway and walked off, which is a $19 act of courage that he would think about a great deal in 11 days. Okaria did one more thing that morning that he did not tell anybody about for 11 days. He went into the tool crib and looked up the calibration record on the bore gauge because the chief had said it was out, and something in him wanted to be able to defend the chief when it came up. Calibrated the 9th of June, current until June of next year. He stood in the crib with the binder open for about 15 seconds. Then he closed the binder and went back to work, because he was 21 years old, and the alternative was walking into an office and telling a man with 19 years that his own words were on a piece of paper that disagreed with him. The group message thread had 31 people in it, 2 photographs, both of her on the stool from behind, taken from the doorway. 1 caption of 4 words, 11 reactions. Nobody thought of that thread as evidence. In 11 days, a legal officer would read all 31 names off a screen, and 11 of those people would go very quiet in their own kitchens. At noon, she went into the tool room, which was empty, and took a green notebook out of her cargo pocket. She wrote 7 lines. Date, time, gauge serial number and calibration date. Barrel 4, .009 over. Barrel 6, .012. Colbeck, verbatim, the sentence about the calibration. The 2 witnesses standing closest when he said it. Not a complaint, a record. She had been writing things down for 23 years. Not once had it been about revenge. It had been about the fact that memory is a soft surface and paper is a hard one, and that when an airplane comes apart at 400 knots, the investigators do not want anybody's recollection. She put the notebook back in her pocket and went back to the barrels. The 3rd radio fragment, 7 years earlier. Sandy 01, be advised the survivor is moving. He's moving toward the wadi. Copy. Tell him to stop moving. Sandy, he cannot hear us. 2 seconds. Then I will make the ground in front of him unattractive. There is a specific way a person says a sentence like that. It is not a joke, and it is not a threat. It is a plan, stated in the flattest possible voice, by somebody deciding to spend something. Back in the bay, at 1400 hours, Colbeck stood over the stand and looked at the barrels for 11 seconds and then said the thing that would end up in a transcript. Leave them. I need the gun on the jet Monday, and I am not writing a deferral on a Saturday because somebody with a gauge wanted a project. If you have ever been handed the worst job in the building by a man who had already decided you could not do the best one, stay with this. Subscribe to Honor Tales, a green notebook closing, and a photograph of her on somebody's phone that was going to be evidence in 11 days. At 1600 hours on Saturday, Master Sergeant Rudy Colbeck sat down at a terminal and did 2 things. The first was a note. 3 sentences to the armament flight commander, asking that the weekend augmentin not be sent back on Sunday. He used the words, unable to keep pace with shop tempo. He used the word willing, which is the word you use about somebody you are dismissing kindly. He was not lying in that note. He believed it. That is worse, and the story is going to be honest about it. The second thing took him 90 seconds. He opened the gun system forms for tail number 820654. He went to the bore inspection block for barrels 1 through 7. He entered the date, his employee number, and the word, complied. The gun was 14 feet away from him on a stand, with 2 barrels past limits, and a woman still working number 7. He did not look at it. He had looked at it that morning. In his head, that counted. 19 years. 3 technicians short since the spring of 2024. A phase inspection running 11 hours late, and a wing standing up an exercise on the 27th. A back that had been going since 2020, and a father in a care home in Ohio at $4,100 a month. Here is what a bore inspection actually requires, so that the size of the 90 seconds is clear. The gun comes off the aircraft. The rotor cluster comes apart. Each of the 7 barrels comes out and goes on felt. A bore scope or a gauge goes down each one from the breech end. Muzzle wear, land erosion, and chrome loss get read against a table and written down individually, barrel by barrel, with the serial number of each barrel recorded. It takes 2 technicians about 3 hours. It cannot be done with the gun in the airplane, because 5 of the 7 barrels are inaccessible. It cannot be done at all with the aircraft airborne, for reasons that do not need explaining. The shortcut had a history. It had started as a thing he did when he had personally watched the work, and had not been at the terminal at the time. Then it became a thing he did when he trusted the technician. Then it became a thing he did. What made it survivable for 2 years is that nothing happened. The barrels he signed for were mostly fine. Erosion is slow. Most guns in most months are inside limits, and a man who signs complied on a gun he has not seen is usually, statistically, correct. That is how the habit ate him. It kept being right. Every month it was right. It got a little easier, and the gap between the signature and the work got a little wider, and nobody audited a back shop that had not broken anything. Captain Neve Ashworth, 30, Armament Flight Commander, received the note at 1641 and signed her concurrence at 1643. 2 minutes. She read 3 sentences from a section chief with 19 years in about an augmentee she had never met, and she agreed with him, and she went back to a slide deck for Monday. That is the whole of Ashworth's failure, and the story does not soften it. She never went to the bay. Not once, all weekend. 400 meters of concrete between her office and that gun, and she did not walk it. At 1650, O'Corey was at the terminal in the bay pulling up a parts request, and the forms, page for 820654, was still open in the second tab. Van Trees was behind him with a rag in her hand. She read the inspection block over his shoulder, left to right. Thumb tracking under the entry, lips still. Date, employee number. Complied. She read it twice. "Ma'am, you all right?" "Fine." She went back to the stand and finished number 7 barrel in the correct sequence and put the brush in the bucket and washed her hands for a long time. The 4th radio fragment, 7 years earlier. Sandy 01, say your ammunition state. 4 seconds. Sandy 01 is Winchester. Winchester means out. Nothing left to shoot with. A gun that fires 4,200 rounds a minute carries 1,150 of them, and 1,150 rounds is 16 seconds of trigger, and 16 seconds is a very long time in the air and no time at all on the ground. Sandy 01, understood. You are cleared to depart station. The reply took 9 seconds to come back. The ground party wrote later that he counted the 9 seconds and that his hand stopped shaking somewhere around 6. Negative. A completed inspection block on a screen, a gun that had not been inspected, and a woman who had just read both. Staff Sergeant Casper Nold stayed after his shift on Saturday and pulled the historical forms on his airplane. Not because he suspected anybody, because a gun with 2 barrels past limits was going to be bolted into his jet on Monday, and he wanted to see the last 4 inspections so he could tell himself it was fine. He pulled 4. The 9th of March, the 14th of April, the 2nd of June, the 27th of June. All 4 signed complied. All 4 with the same employee number. Then he pulled the aircraft's own maintenance history for those 4 dates, because a crew chief can do that in about 90 seconds, and because he had a bad feeling he could not name yet. On the 9th of March, the gun had been in the aircraft. Installed. Not on a stand. On the 2nd of June, the gun had been in the aircraft. On the 27th of June, the aircraft had been flying. 2 sorties. 4.1 hours. A bore inspection requires the barrels off the rotor and on the felt. It cannot be done in the airplane. It cannot be done at all while the airplane is at 11,000 feet. He sat in an empty hangar office at 2100 hours and looked at 4 entries that could not have happened. He checked a 4th time from a different direction because he wanted to be wrong. He pulled the flying schedule for the 27th of June and matched it against the form's entry by timestamp. The entry was made at 1942. The aircraft had landed from its 2nd sortie at 1911 and was on the ramp with the gun in it, hot, being turned for the next day. 31 minutes. Not 3 hours. And no gun on a stand anywhere in the building that evening, because the stand log is its own document, and Nolde pulled that too. He called a retired chief in Tucson at 2115, a man who had run that same section for 6 years and who now sold boat parts. Nolde described it without naming anybody. He was careful about that, and the retired chief noticed he was being careful, which told him the name anyway. "Stop," the old man's voice on a bad connection. "Do not take this to your section, Chief. Do not put it in a text message. If a man signs what he did not see, that is not a paperwork problem. That is somebody's airplane, and one day it is somebody's kid in it. You take that up. Not sideways. Up. Chief, up is a captain who signs whatever the section sends her. Then up past her. That is the group. Then the group. Nolde put the phone down and sat in a dark office for 11 minutes. At 22:40, he walked back through the gun bay on his way to his truck. The overhead lights were off, one task light on the stand. She was still there. Alone, 4 hours after the shift ended, working number 7 barrel through the last of the sequence, bore, gas port, rotor track, each item touched once, step numbers moving on her lips. Nobody was watching her. Nobody was grading her. There was no version of that Saturday in which finishing that barrel correctly helped her in any way at all. Nolde stood in the dark at the edge of the bay for about 20 seconds. Then he went home and did not sleep much. What he could not get past, lying awake that night, was the ordinariness of it. He had worked for Colbeck for 4 years. The man had covered his shift when his daughter was born. The man had driven 2 hours on a Sunday to pick up a part rather than let a jet sit. The man had never once taken credit for anything Nolde had done, and had twice given him credit he had not earned. You do not go up the chain on that man over 4 entries in a database, except that 1,150 rounds go through those barrels at 4,200 a minute, and a barrel that fails does not fail politely. And there is a young lieutenant in the squadron who is going to strap into that airplane on Thursday. In the parking lot, Colbeck sat in his truck with the door open and the dome light on the phone with a care facility in Ohio about a bill. 19 years. A back that would not let him lift a barrel anymore, which was why he had a shop full of people who lifted them and a terminal where he signed for it. He was not a monster. The story needs that on the record, because the reckoning that is coming lands harder if he is a man. What the crew chief did not know yet was that the woman on the stool had already flown that airplane on the worst day of its life. Subscribe so you do not miss it. A crew chief with 4 forms in his hand, and no idea that the answer to all 4 was sitting 15 feet away with a wire brush. Base quarters. 2,300 hours. A room with 3 boxes still unopened in it, because she had been on station 4 days. A flight suit hung on the back of the door. Sage green, worn pale at the shoulders, and on the left shoulder, a patch. Subdued. Not the bright squadron version people buy at reunions. The low-contrast one that goes on the flying suit. A sandy tab across the top. A date underneath it in March of 2019. Colonel Audra Van Treese, 45 years old. United States Air Force, incoming wing commander. Call sign Cinder. Sandy is not a nickname. In the A-10 community, it is a job. The Sandy is the rescue escort, the on-scene commander for a recovery, the one who owns the airspace over a man on the ground and decides everything that happens above him until he is out. Sandy 01 is the lead. That night in March of 2019, she had been 38 years old, and she had held that airspace for 4 hours and 11 minutes. The pilot on the ground was a captain named Wynne Calder. 29 at the time. He had come out of an aircraft at low altitude with a broken wrist and no radio for the first 40 minutes. Her first 2 passes worked. The third pass took a stream of fire up through the left wing and along the gun bay, and the gun stopped, and the annunciator told her what she already knew from the sound. 1,150 rounds is 16 seconds of trigger. She had used all of it. Then she was told she was cleared to depart station, and she counted 9 seconds, and she said negative. Because an airplane overhead is a thing the enemy has to think about. A gun that has stopped firing looks exactly like a gun that has not fired yet. She had nothing left to shoot with, and she stayed for 51 more minutes, low and loud, flying an aircraft that was bleeding hydraulic fluid, so that 11 men on the ground would have something over their heads while the helicopters came in. The 51 minutes are what the tape is famous for in the rescue community, and almost nobody outside it has heard the tape. She flew a pattern that put the aircraft between the ground party and the high ground on every pass, low enough that the airframe was the loudest thing in that valley. 23 passes. No gun. Nothing on the wings that could be used at that range without putting it on top of the men she was protecting. She talked the whole time. That is the other thing the tape is famous for. A steady, unhurried voice, giving a broken-wristed captain in a wadi a heading, a count, and a reason every 90 seconds for 51 minutes, in a tone that never once went up. The helicopters came in from the south at 0358. Calder came out at 0412. She brought 8-206-54 home on one hydraulic system and manual reversion, with the left wing holed in 9 places and the gun destroyed. Every reasonable estimate wrote the airframe off. It was rebuilt over 4 years, because A-10's are rebuilt, because that is what they are. It came back to the flight line in 2023, and a 26-year-old staff sergeant named Casper Nolde was given it as his own. There is a recording of the last 4 minutes of it, and the rescue community has been teaching off it for 6 years. What people notice first is that she never gives an order twice. What they notice second, if somebody points it out, is the count. Every 90 seconds, she gave the man on the ground a number, and the numbers went down, and a number that goes down is the only clock a person in that situation has. 4, then 3, then 2. She has never listened to the recording. She has been asked to speak at the schoolhouse about it twice and has declined both times. And the second time, she wrote a 2-line reply saying the tape teaches better without her standing next to it. The cost was 2 compressed vertebrae from the ejection seat she never used, which is a thing that happens to the spine over 4 hours of high G maneuvering in an aircraft that is coming apart. Flying status gone in 2021. That is why she stands with her weight even and her hands loose. Not composure. Vertebrae. And it is why, when she arrived at a wing 4 days before taking command, she asked the maintenance group to put her to work instead of walking her through a briefing. There is one more thing in that room worth naming, because it explains the 3 days. 3 boxes, unopened, and on top of the nearest one, a framed photograph face down. Not the squadron, not a formation. 11 men on a ramp in the dark in March of 2019, out of focus, taken on somebody's phone through a canopy, and a captain with a splinted wrist in the middle of them. She has moved that photograph to 9 duty stations and has never once hung it. She had already read the false inspection block over an airman's shoulder at 1650. She could have ended the entire thing that night with one phone call. She had the rank in a drawer 11 feet from where she was standing. She did not make the call. She sat on the edge of the bed in a quiet room and thought about it for a long time, and decided to go back on Monday morning in the same coveralls and watch what the section did when it believed nobody was watching. Because a wing commander who fixes one signature has fixed one signature. A patch on a hanger in a dark room, and a woman deciding to wait 2 more days. Monday, 0630. The gun went on the cart. Nolde was standing at the stand when they started rolling it, and he said the sentence he had been building since 2100 hours on Saturday. "Chief, I want the bores re-gauged before it goes on my jet." Colbeck did not raise his voice. He never once raised his voice in this entire story, and that is part of why it worked for 19 years. "Your jet," he said it warmly. "That is adorable. It is the taxpayer's jet, Sergeant, and it is my gun, and it is signed. You want to re-gauge a signed inspection on a Monday with the exercise in 9 days. You can come and explain that to the captain, and then you can explain it to the production superintendent, and then you can explain to me why my section is the one holding up the schedule. Or you can chalk the cart. Nolde chalked the cart. 29 years old, 4 stripes, and a section chief with 19 years standing between him and the thing he knew. That is not cowardice. That is what a rank structure does to a true sentence when the true sentence is inconvenient. Nolde had one more move available to him, and both he and the story know it. He could have refused. A crew chief owns the acceptance of his aircraft, and there is a block on a form where he signs to say he accepts it, and he could have declined to sign and sent the whole thing up to the production superintendent inside 11 minutes. He thought about it while he was chalking the cart. What stopped him was not fear of Colbeck. It was arithmetic he had done 100 times in 4 years. He was 29, he had one data point, the signature was already in the system, and a crew chief who refuses a signed inspection had better be right, because if he is wrong, he is the maintainer who cost the wing a jet on the schedule 9 days before an exercise. He was right. He did not know he was right. That distinction cost him 2 nights of sleep, and he has said since that he would take those 2 nights back over almost anything else in his career. They rolled the gun out at 0650. The load happens on the ramp with the aircraft on jacks at the nose. The gun goes in through the underside, 19 feet of it, and it takes 4 people and about 40 minutes, and everybody is quiet while it seats. Van Trees watched from 20 feet away. Loner coveralls, ball cap, hands loose, weight even. A woman nobody had introduced, standing at the edge of a ramp at 7 in the morning, while 2 barrels that were .009 and .012 over serviceable limits went into an airplane on a signature. The gun seated at 0731. Colbeck came down the ladder pleased. Ahead of schedule for the first time in 3 weeks. He saw her at the edge of the ramp, and he was in a good enough mood to be generous about it. You can go home now, seriously. You did the barrels. They are clean. I will tell the captain you were willing. Grown-ups have it from here. And she smiled at him. It was the first time in 3 days that anybody in that wing had seen her smile. It was small, and it was not warm, and it did not have anything in it that a person could point to afterward and call insubordinate. Colbeck would spend 11 days trying to work out what he had missed in it. Thank you, Chief. 3 words. She walked away. Captain Neve Ashworth crossed the ramp at 0740 on her way to a meeting and walked within 9 feet of the nose of that aircraft. She saw a gun load finishing ahead of schedule. She saw her section chief on a ladder looking satisfied. She saw a maintainer in loner coveralls walking toward the hangar. She kept walking. 400 meters of concrete all weekend, and she had never once walked it. That omission is why what came next was institutional instead of personal. One man signed what he did not see. One officer never looked. A shop laughed at a nickname. 31 people were in a group message. The system did not fail because of a villain. It failed the way systems do, in small, comfortable increments, with everybody's reasons intact. At 0752, at the edge of the ramp, Von Treese took out her phone. She did not call anybody. She photographed the tail number, 820654, stenciled black on the nose gear door, with the time stamp running. Then she put the phone away and went to find a cup of coffee like anybody else. A 30mm cannon bolted into an airplane on the word of a man who never looked down the barrels. Tuesday. 0900, 91 degrees in the bay and climbing. She came back in the same coveralls. Nobody was surprised anymore. The volunteer had become furniture. She was at the spare cradle with a rag and a torque wrench, and the heat in that bay by 9 in the morning is the kind that gets into the seams of things. She unzipped the coveralls to the waist and pushed the sleeves down and tied them off, the way every maintainer in that building had done 1,000 times. Underneath was a flight suit. Sage green, worn pale at the shoulders, and on the left shoulder, a subdued patch. Casper Nold was 11 feet away with a panel in his hands. He read the patch. That took about a second and a half. A sandy tab, a date in March of 2019. Then his eyes went down and left, to the gun cradle on the floor beside her, where the tail number was stenciled in black on the frame. 820654. He had stenciled that number himself, twice. He had repainted it in the spring because the solvent takes it off. He knew the date on that patch because it is written in the aircraft's own historical record, in the block that describes why an airframe was out of service from March of 2019 until August of 2023. And he had read that block in his first week as its dedicated crew chief because that is what you do when they give you a jet with a story. The panel came down slowly and rested on his knee. Casper Nolde went completely still. "Ma'am," she looked up. "Ma'am, that is my jet's date. Here is how it actually moves through a room like that." Nobody looks at her first. They look at Nolde, because Nolde is 29 and reliable, and has never in 4 years stopped moving in the middle of a task. Okori looked at Nolde. Then 2 technicians at the wash rack looked at Nolde. Then everybody was looking at where Nolde was looking, and the noise level in that bay dropped in stages, like somebody turning down 4 separate dials. Nolde did not stand up. He did not call the room to attention. Nothing that dramatic happened, because he was not thinking about the room at all. He was doing the thing a crew chief does, which is putting 2 facts side by side and refusing to look away until they agree. Fact 1. The patch on that shoulder carries a date and a tab that mean an on-scene rescue command in March of 2019. Fact 2. The airplane he has kept alive for 3 years went out of service in March of 2019 with 9 holes in the left wing and a destroyed gun, and came back in August of 2023. And the block that explains why is 4 lines long, and he has read it maybe 40 times. The 2 facts agreed. Colbeck came out of the office because a quiet shop is a shop that has broken something. He saw a woman in a flight suit with her coveralls tied at the waist. His face went through it in order, and the whole bay watched it happen. Confusion first, a man checking a sum. Then disbelief, which lasted the longest. Then recognition, which is a different thing and arrives from a different direction, and which came to him with a date on it, and a signature block and 90 seconds at a terminal at 1600 hours on Saturday. Then the last one. It is worth saying what he was actually seeing, because it was not rank. A master sergeant is not frightened of a colonel in the ordinary way. He has worked for 11 of them. What went through Rudy Colbeck at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning was narrower than that, and much colder. He was looking at a woman who had spent 3 days doing the job at the bench, in sequence, correctly, in front of him, while he told a room she could not keep pace. Every hour of that was now a piece of evidence about him rather than about her, and there were 16 witnesses to all of it, and he had put his own employee number on a form at 1600 hours on Saturday, with her standing 14 feet away. "Master Sergeant." Her voice did not change from the voice that had said, "Okay, and yes, Chief for 3 days. Get the gun off the aircraft and put it back on the stand." Colbeck did not move for 2 seconds. The bay had 16 people in it, and not one of them moved. Okori had a socket in his hand, and he set it down on the bench very slowly, the way people do when they have decided the safest thing available is to make no noise at all. At the wash rack, a senior airman turned the water off, which is the only sound anybody remembers from that part of it. "Ma'am, I do not know who you are. You do not need to. That is a lawful order, and you know it is. Captain Neve Ashworth came through the roll-up door at that exact moment, 40 minutes late to a shop she had not visited in 3 days, and stopped. She had seen that stance somewhere, weight even, hands loose, in processing photographs at the group on Thursday, on a slide with a name under it. Her stomach arrived somewhere around her knees. Shop! Attention! There is a particular quality to that command in a working shop. It is not a parade. People come to attention holding things. A man with a panel under one arm and a torque wrench in the other hand does his best. Nolde was already standing. He had not moved in 90 seconds. 16 people came to attention in a gun bay. This is Colonel Von Treese. She takes the wing on Friday. 16 people at attention in a gun bay, and one man still holding a torque wrench he had forgotten he was holding. So the gun came off the aircraft by 1100 hours on Tuesday. Number 4 gauged at .009 over. Number 6 at .012. Exactly what she had said on Saturday morning with a wire brush in her hand. The record's pull started Monday the 13th and took 9 days. 4 bore inspections across 3 aircraft, signed complied on dates the guns were installed or the aircraft was flying. Not 400. 4. That is the number, and the story is not going to inflate it, because 4 is enough. It was not sabotage. Nobody was paid. There was no ring. It was a man with 19 years, 3 technicians short since the spring of 2024, a father in a care home at $4,100 a month, and a habit that had eroded one shortcut at a time until it stopped feeling like one. Here is what the wing actually did with it, because the reckoning in this story is procedural, and it is worth watching. The gun came off on Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, the maintenance group had a list of every gun system in the wing and the date of its last bore inspection. By Wednesday afternoon, quality assurance had a sampling plan that did not sample, because Van Treese told them a sample was how they had arrived here. 22 aircraft, every gun, every barrel on felt. It cost the wing 1,100 maintenance hours and pushed the exercise participation down by 2 aircraft, and she signed the memo that pushed it and sent a copy to the numbered Air Force herself rather than let it be discovered. That memo is the part of this that senior officers who hear the story tend to remember. The commander-directed investigation opened on the 15th. Colbeck kept his stripes. He kept his retirement. He was decertified on gun systems, removed from the section, and moved to a job in the support flight, where he does not hold signature authority on anything. She told him herself, in an office, with the door open and one witness present, in 11 words. "I'm not taking your stripes. I'm taking your pen." He started to say something about the Manning. "I know about the Manning. I read the Manning before I read your file. The Manning is my problem now, and I am going to fix it. Your signature was never the Manning. It was a choice you made 90 seconds at a time for 2 years. A pause. You will find that is worse than losing the stripes. I am sorry that it is." Captain Ashworth received a letter of counseling and kept her flight, because removing her would have taught that wing that the punishment for not walking 400 meters is somebody else's career, and Van Treese wanted a different lesson in the building. The re-inspection finished inside 9 days. 3 more barrels came back past limits, all on the same 2 aircraft, none of them anybody's fault. All of them found, because a colonel spent a Saturday on a stool. Airman First Class Des Ocourier found the 4th falsified entry. Nobody asked him to. He went back through the historical forms on his own time on the Thursday, because a colonel had spent 3 days on a stool, doing a job properly while he watched, and it had rearranged something in him about what the work was for. He is at the technical training course now that makes him a trainer. She signed the slot herself and did not mention it to him. If there is somebody in your building doing the worst job in it, and doing it well while people talk over them, go and look at what they are actually doing. Subscribe to Honor Tales. Friday the 24th, last light on the ramp. Nolde walked her out to 8-20654 without either of them making an arrangement about it. She was in blues by then, because it was the day before she took the wing. The jet sat with its canopy open and its nose gear door down and the tail number stenciled in black, still slightly newer than the paint around it. She put a hand flat on the underside of the left wing, along a panel line where the skin changes character if you know where to look, over 9 repaired holes that stopped being holes in August of 2023. I have had her since she came back, Nolde said. 2023. I read the block my first week. I never thought about who was in it. Nobody does. 2 words. They stood there for a while and did not say anything else, because there was nothing that needed saying, and both of them knew it. There is one more thing. In the margin of the 3rd falsified form, in Colbeck's handwriting, in pencil, is a line that has nothing to do with bore inspections. Tell Marsh the hogs are quiet. Devlin Marsh is a contractor field representative. He was not at that wing. He has not been at that wing in 2 years. The last entry on his badge record puts him at a coalition base in the Horn of Africa, and nobody at that base has logged him out. The investigation that closed on the 23rd closed on the guns. It did not close on the sentence in the margin. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.